for the university system. When we received the bill from the House, and started working on it, we kept thinking of Goldilocks. We had the Goldilocks going to the House and finding one bowl of porridge a little too hot. You could label that the executive recommendation. We also found one of the bowls too cold, and that would be the House amendments to the bill. So we ate the middle bowl, which was really right down the middle. It's about half the way between where the House was and where the executive budget was. Our ongoing increase to this budget over the House recommendation is only 2.7%. And when you keep in mind that the House, when they passed the bill, sent it over to us, telling us we did not do anything regarding inflation, you look at that. So you can practically look at most of the changes that were in the additional appropriation is in the area of inflation adjustments. A couple years ago, 2 years ago actually, we went into a funding formula for higher education. The House made a number of changes, but they made a fatal flaw in what they did, and it really skewed campuses. What happened is they ended up with some campuses big winners and other campuses big losers. So the first thing your committee did is go back very closely to the original funding formula, and we found that the dollar amount difference going with that adjusted formula and what the House had done was only a couple $100,000. So first of all, we smoothed out the impact of those changes. One of the biggest ones they made is if you recall, we have a formula which we look at when we look at the bill itself having to do with remedial work. They changed the factor in that area, which really damaged the two-year schools because they provide most of the remedial work on our four-year campuses. We adjusted the credit volume factor to provide a factor that goes not up to 100,000 credits, but 210,000 credit hours. We provided a 2% supplemental funding increase for institutions. The university system likes to use cost to continue. They misunderstand what everyone else, I believe, thinks what it means, so we changed it to supplemental funding. And that is essentially the inflation factor that we folded in these amendments. We restored ongoing funding for extraordinary repairs in institution budgets. What the House had done is taken the money out of the institutions, put it in the board office, and then the board office was supposed to send it back to the institutions. We felt, let's put the money where it originally was and where it's going to end up most likely anyway. And that, of course, when you look at the budget for the board office, that is a decrease of money because the money was sent back to the campuses. We originally, the tribal college assistant grants, that's for non-natives who attend the campuses. Last session, there was $1 million to assist the tribes in that particular endeavor. The House had reduced it to $500,000. We did not see a reason why we should turn back the clock on what we have done in the past. So we went back to the $1 million, and the funding for that $500,000 did not come from the general fund. It came from excess reserves of the Student Loan Trust Fund, which has about 35 point some million dollars in it at the present time. An area that needs to be revisited. As you are aware, the auditors who were working as external auditors were put into the state auditor's office, and that's already passed and on its way to the governor. The attorneys were moved to the Attorney General's office, and we had some mixed communications because they had not done anything regarding the intellectual property attorney position in Grand Forks. So we put the funding back into this particular budget for that particular position. And in discussions with people who are on the conference committee on the Attorney General's budget, I think what's going to happen is they are going to take that funding and put it into the Attorney General's office because I believe they can make some rational reasons why that position, which will still be located at UND, should be under the Attorney General. We added $300,000 for an internal auditing pool in the NDUS office so that, and we had language that clarifies that the board may have and should have internal auditors or contract for internal auditing functions at the campuses. Again, this was put in here, but the sections that dealt with auditors and lawyers are out of this bill because they are either in the auditor's budget or in the Attorney General's budget. We added $250,000 of one-time funding to the NDUS office for contract and accrued leave payouts. Those of you who sat in on some of the folks who were up for the Board of Higher Education, when asked questions about do you think the new chancellor should have his or her, an ability to have his or her own people there, because of what the board has done regarding employees up there that are at will, but you have to pay them a year's salary if you ask them to leave, we put in some funding there in case the new chancellor would like to make any changes. If the money isn't spent for that purpose, it reverts back to the general fund. We added $800,000 of one-time funding for document digitalization at DSU Theodore Roosevelt Center. We added additional funding, or we left additional funding for academic and CTE scholarships, and we added some capital projects. I did not get the list handed out, but by the time we're done with this presentation, you will get a copy of all of the construction projects that are in this particular bill. It's in the amendments, but I thought a separate sheet might be handy for y'all. First of all, the House did no prioritization. There are some places where you've got to replace a window, a roof, an electrical system, etc. Well, they did not do any prioritization. They just took everything out, which gave us kind of a clean slate. The governor roughly had $300 million of one-time construction projects in his budget. What the Senate, if we pass this bill and what other bills we have passed, we have cut that in two-thirds. It's about $100 million, right around there. The projects that we looked at in the university system budget are mostly deferred maintenance and health and safety issues. And the projects include, the other thing the House did not do is there were local projects that were being funded either by gifts or by assessments. For example, there's a project at NDSU where the students voted for an aquatic center, and we approved those things. So, Mr. President, we did campus infrastructure at BSC, and this is general fund money, and that includes some repairs, some deferred maintenance. We also allowed BSC to spend student money that they have already raised to do some work on the student union. At Lake Region, They have switchgear, electrical services, and window replacement for $1.6 million. It made sense to do that deferred maintenance because we talk about deferred maintenance all the time. They continued, and the House had the money in to complete the second phase of the medical school building. There's a student engagement project, which is student money at the University of North Dakota that we allowed them to spend. Airport project, the apron at the Grand Forks Airport, which is used by the aviation school, is off the beaten path and no longer qualifies for any federal funding. So if you're going to repair that, we come up with the money. And we're phasing it in over a number of years, and it's a $6 million project. The executive budget had $16 million for the project. The NDSU Aquatic Center, students had voted, and that would be revenue bonds. The State College of Science, they have some sewer water separation issues. That's infrastructure. Also, you could say health and safety. And that's slightly over $13 million. At Valley City State University, what do you do if you have a power plant that doesn't work and cannot be repaired? Well, I guess at some point you replace it. All of these projects were in the executive budget. We replaced that, and the cost of that was $14 million. Valley City also has a fine arts building. Actually, it's 3 buildings, and again, deferred maintenance. 2 of them are going to be torn down. Unfortunately, one of them is going to be on the wet side of the dike, and because it's state property, we kind of felt an obligation to move in that direction and take care of that situation. Also at Valley City, the students and the community have gotten together, and they're doing a health and wellness facility. It's no state money, but we authorize them to proceed. At Dakota College at Bottineau, there was dormitory upgrades. Those are revenue bonds. And the Nelson Science Center has leaky roofs and has some power plant issues, and that's also at Bottineau. So, Mr. President, there's one other item that will not be on the list, but it will be listed. Section 4 of the bill is a contingent appropriation for Dunbar Hall at NDSU. That's a $46 million project, and the language that's in the bill talks about the general fund projections, etc. But as the committee is well aware, at the end of the day, if we have contingencies that make it to the end of the session, the mechanism will all have to be folded into the OMB budget, so you don't have a bill over here that says, the first 20 million go here, and another bill says the first 20 million go there. That just makes sense. So, Mr. President, as I mentioned, you will get a copy of that list. It's being printed now, I think. Some other things we did. The House went down the road of some micromanaging, and we reversed the trend there in a number of the areas. We took out the sections, as mentioned, about the auditor and attorney general because they're in their budgets. We currently, any campus capital project over $385,000 needs budget section approval, but they had put in language regarding locally funded projects such as parking lots that would be funded locally but would have to wait for budget section approval. The current law seems to have worked for an awful long time, and we thought that if you're at Mayville and you get a flooded parking lot and you have local money that wants to fix it, they shouldn't have to wait till September for the budget section meeting. They do have to report this to us, but they can go ahead like they have proceeded in the past. We removed the section which was similar to language in 1303. 1303 would have the legislature set tuition. But your committee was cognizant of Lucy and Charlie Brown, worried about, is she going to hold the football, is she going to pull it away? So what you will see in this bill is a 2.5% cap on tuition for each of the next 2 years, with a safety valve and, with a safety valve. And that is that if Mayville, in their process of changing their tuition model, has, let's say, $200 of fees that are going to be rolled into tuition, if the total amount of change is over 2.5%, they have to go to the budget section and have our fingerprints on it before they can go ahead. And we may or may not, I don't know what we would do in each individual case. We had a section last time on capital construction projects. We were going to set aside 5%, I think it was, put it in the board office, and that was going to cause lower bids on projects because they had 5% less money than everyone else knew they had. And then the board was going to spread that money out to projects that needed it. At the end of the day, the money went out to the projects that they had been designated for anyway. Well, the House had suggested that we take a certain percentage out of any capital construction projects and set that aside in a fund in the board office for future maintenance and work on those buildings. The problem is, as your committee believed, if 4 years from now the legislature comes to town and finds a pool in the board office of $30 million, we're going to spend it at that time. So we took that section out of the bill. The House had said that we as a legislature are going to mandate specifically how the board evaluates presidents and chancellors. And we felt, that's their job. And we had a section about Busgate. That is some buses that were ordered a number of years ago that no one wants to pay the bill. And the House had assessed NDSU and UND, although they weren't the only ones involved, I guess, $325,000 each, and then DOT, I can't add them that fast, $250. And we decided, your committee decided, to kick the can down the road. We allowed the campuses to keep the money. The people whose fingerprints were on that are no longer at those campuses, and we just decided, let's move on. We adjusted a section regarding performance funding pool. If you recall, last time we put together $5 million, put it in a pool, and told the board, go ahead and pay this out on performance. We gave them 0 guidelines. They looked at it. Your interim committee looked at it. The money is still there. So what we did is we utilized that funding to transfer to campuses that had specific energy development issues and problems, not within the formula, but as a one-time grant. A couple other areas of change, and I'm sorry it takes so long, but there was quite a few changes. We restored the ability of the State Board of Higher Education to adjust FTE positions at campuses. Since at least 15 years, we have not listed FTEs at Mayville or Bottineau or Minot State. We just say, with a block grant, here's your money. If the board feels you need 2 more English teachers, go ahead and hire them, if you have the money. Well, the House suggested that they come to the Emergency Commission in the budget section. Problem is, you don't know if you need those English teachers prior to June, and it's too late by the end of September when the budget section meets again. We considered it to be a solution in search of a problem, and we removed that particular item. I already mentioned we limit tuition rate increases 2.5 except at the UND-SMHS, the medical school. As they have moved forward with their expansion, they have built into their plan over the next years 3.9%. So we exempted them from the 2.5%. Severance packages was another thing that was in the news last session and is in this particular bill. What we have said is that the at-will employees at the board office have to be, severance packages have to follow the same laws as other state agencies rather than having essentially one-year contracts. And we required a report from the Board of Higher Education regarding the future plans to restore financial stability at DSU, Dickinson State University. They have some problems, they have some issues. This budget does not solve all of that, but we're asking the board to give us a plan of action as to how you're going to make them financially stable. One of the last areas that I'm going to mention has to do with administration versus instruction. We really want to get our hands on administrative costs. You know, since we arrived here, or at least it was announced right after the beginning of the session, the board created an additional vice chancellorship. And I know at some of our campuses there are many parking places that are designated for vice presidents. And our challenge is that we can say you have to spend so much money for instruction, a certain percentage, but you can hire a vice president, have him or her teach one class, one semester every year, and they are instruction. So we're asking the interim committee to take a good look at that. I mean, we can write in language, but it will be full of holes. So, Mr. President, those are the major changes in the House to the House version of 1003, and your Appropriations Committee, on a unanimous vote, urged their adoption.
Further discussion, Senator Dever.
Mr. President, I have a question regarding the transfer of the attorneys, and my question is, I understand there was a suggestion made that be delayed for a year in order to allow for a transition. And I'm curious if that was given consideration or if the adoption of these amendments is the end of that conversation.
Senator Holmberg, do you wish to answer the question?
Yes. The adoption of these amendments will have nothing to do with that because that issue is within the Attorney General's budget. That whole issue was moved into the Attorney General. So the House has passed amendments that move them. The board has made recommendations. There was quite a bit of misinformation regarding the initial movement by the board, by the House, in that a sense that these attorneys, if an attorney was at UND, they would automatically have to come to Bismarck. Nothing could be further from the truth. Attorneys will be where attorneys are, where they're needed. So, but as far as the question of will it be delayed 1 year, that's the purview of that other committee. It has nothing to do with this bill anymore.
Further discussion? Hearing none, the question is on the proposed amendments to House Bill 1003. As many senators are in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The amendments are adopted. We'll go to the 14th order, House Bill 1003. Madam Secretary.
Engross House Bill 1003, now with Senate amendments, a bill for an act to provide an appropriation for defraying the expenses of the North Dakota University system, to provide for budget section reports, to provide for reports to the 65th Legislative Assembly, to provide for legislative management reports and studies, to provide contingent appropriations to the State Board of Higher Ed, to provide exemptions and declare an emergency.
Senator Holmberg.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, the budget that was presented by the executive branch had an increase of 19.4% in ongoing expenses. The budget that you have before you right now has an 8.9% increase, which falls well within the range of what is happening with other agencies. And I could play the game of saying, actually, this budget is a 1.89% increase from last biennium. But last biennium, we built a lot of buildings. So if you look at total funding, yes, it's only 1.89, but I think it's fairer to look at it at the 8.9%. Now, Mr. President, about 25 years ago, I had a dean at the University of North Dakota after a legislative session asked me, and that individual was kind of unhappy about the amount of money coming, and she said, "What does the price of wheat have to do with how much money we get in higher education?" And I answered by saying, "A lot." Well, Mr. President, we have some of the same level of individuals asking the question, what in the world does the price of oil have to do with higher education's appropriations? The answer is a lot. We had, you might have received communications from some of your friends back home about their concern, but the handout that you received looks at the percentage changes that are in this particular budget. Now, Mr. President, overall, we have done a number of things for students, and that's what we are here for. For example, we cap tuition, as I already mentioned, and that will help students, and it certainly will help you as a legislator if you go home. If we hadn't capped tuition, if you went home and all of a sudden, immediately after you got home, the board raised tuition X, and of course, you know who would be blamed. We increased needs-based scholarships by $4.5 million, which raised the semester needs-based amount from $750 to $975 per semester. And research indicates that needs-based makes a much larger dent on who goes to college than does merit-based. We did not reduce merit-based scholarships at all, but we did, in this budget, we've increased needs-based scholarships. And again, as I mentioned, another thing for students, we are zeroing in on the institutions versus, or instruction versus administration issues. Mr. President, I'm trying to think of his name, Albert Hubbard. There are two great philosophers who have an idea and a philosophy on change. Albert Hubbard said, "The greatest mistake you can make in life is to continually fear that you will make one and become a failure." The other philosopher is Homer Simpson, who says, "Trying is the first step towards failure." Well, Mr. President, 2 years ago, actually it took a little longer to do, but the university system, with a lot of help from some people in this room, changed their funding formula. And if you caught the news, I think Oregon, within this last week, has also gone to a formula where you don't pay someone for sitting in their seat, you pay them for successfully completing credits. So we have North Dakota, the university system 2 years ago, went away from the philosophy that is the same as corrections. You get rewarded for time and seat. So what we did, what the legislature did with the university system, is we went to a system where if you successfully complete student credit hour, that's what is paid to the campus, not just getting young people in the door and not being successful. But the funding formula, and I know the senator from District 44 might like to hear this, but it is not a holy relic. The funding formula is a work in progress, and adjustments are made over time and will continue to be made over time. But the bottom line is you get paid for successfully completing credit hours. Some classes cost more to give than others. If it's a diesel class, it costs a lot more to give than does a person who successfully completes English 101, or a law class, or an advanced pharmacy class. So they're all categorized. They were done with a committee of higher education people in the state of North Dakota. Then we have a size factor, a school volume. A school like UND or NDSU who produce millions of credits per biennium versus a smaller school that only has 200,000 or 70,000. When you go through the funding formula that the Board of Higher Education has as a sacred relic, they always end up with cost to continue. And that's where one of the big divisions of interpretation lie. The committee and the House, and I believe OMB, believes that if the funding formula generates 15% more money next year, that 15% should count as money that you have available to spend. Whereas there are some in the higher education community that believe, well, that's our money because we earned it, therefore, where is cost to continue, 3 and 3, and inflation factors, etc. So, Mr. President, if you look at the handout, the blue handout that you received, that is the funding formula that is in this bill. And I know campus, I mean, if you're from a particular community that has a campus, you want to know what those numbers are, just like in elementary and secondary. You want to see the printout. And you can see we will take we'll take a campus that isn't located here, but they all are. Let's look at NDSU, second from the bottom. Last time, the first column, 2013-15, that's their general fund appropriation. We did something different this year that we haven't done before, but we had to go back and plug it in, and that is the original constitutional campuses have trust fund from the land board. They get that money, and it can be sizable. As you see with NDSU, their trust fund allocation last biennium was $2 million. Next biennium, their trust fund is $3.4 million, so a sizable increase. Anyway, we plug that in because that's money that's for their operations. Then we have the base funding formula, that is that higher education funding formula, that's what it generates. The supplemental funding, that is the 2 and 2, what you could call inflation factor. Extraordinary needs is the money for campuses that have particular issues that are challenging, but we didn't want to plug it into the formula because it's one-time funding. They better get it. If there's a problem, it needs to be corrected rather than just giving them the money. And then you see the column that's differences. That is the additional funding that they received from last biennium. And it's all over the map. But you don't have huge losers. And the reason it's over the map is because a school like Lake Region has produced a lot more credits. And remember, we told them we're going to reward successfully completed credits. And then you see the last 2 columns in gray. That is, if you want to call it cost to continue, if you want to call it supplemental, I don't care what you call it. But the first column shows how much it would cost each one of those campuses to pay a 3 and 3 salary increase, the health insurance increase, and estimated utility costs. And then the final column is how much they have left over. And you see, except for one school, which we still need to talk about, not today, they're in the black pretty decently. And the last parting shot on this page, when you get over to the issue of tuition, there is no tuition folded in here, no tuition increases. For example, and I'll pick on NDSU because it's south of me, if they were to raise their tuition, and we're not saying they have to, if they were to raise their tuition 2.5%, they would gain an additional $7.2 million on top of the $6.5 million. So, again, going back to Goldilocks, some will say this is too hot. There will be those that will say it's too cold, but we tried to balance out this issue. There's a couple other issues, I'm really getting close to the end, a couple other issues that still are bubbling. One of them is DSU. As you know, they have lost a huge percentage of their student body, which impacts if we're paying on completed credits. We need to have some kind of a way of handling that issue, and that is something that is still ongoing. The thing that's interesting, though, at least in my observations with the various campuses and the board office, the one word that never comes up is prioritization. If you're down a little bit, what are your priorities? We have to do it all the time. They also need to do it. The board office was not pleased with the amount of money in governance. Last session, we added $2 million to governance, and 2/3 of that was spent either on buying out the previous chancellor, that was about $1 million out of the two, hiring a new chief of staff, that was about $400,000, doing some work on hiring outsiders to do strategic plan. So we were not convinced at this stage that we wanted to give them another $2 million back. We weren't satisfied that it could not have been spent better. So, Mr. President, that is a run-through of the university system budget. And your committee again voted 13-0 for a due pass. I believe I can't remember when we came out 13-0 on this budget.
Senator Lafine.
Mr. President, may we be on the 8th order?
Without objection, the Senate will be on the 8th order. Senator Lafine.
Mr. President, as per Senate Rule 321, I would request to be excused from voting on House Bill 1003 and can explain when it's the right time.
No time like the present.
All right.
I would ask that the senator explain the reason to have the issue raised to the Senate, and then the Senate, without debate, will decide the matter whether you would be permitted to vote or not.
Mr. President, since we adjourned last session, my firm was awarded the architectural services contract for the medical school, and the second half appropriation for that project is in this bill. It's a substantial project, and it does affect my firm and me directly, individually, uniquely, and substantially as per the rule. So I would ask to be recused from voting on this bill.
Very well. Per Senate procedure, there's no debate of the matter. The question is spelled out in Senate rules precisely how it's to be presented to the Senate. And the question is, I'm not going to do it yet, but the question is, shall Senator Lafine, for the reasons stated, be permitted to vote? So just to clarify, if that's not perfectly clear, simple as that. If you think that you've heard the reason that he stated that he wishes to be recused, if you think that he should be, despite that, you think he should be permitted / required to vote, you vote yes. If you agree that he should not be permitted to vote because of a perceived or actual conflict of some sort, you just vote no. Your vote would be no, and it's a voice vote. Is there any questions from any senators on that? That is the question. Shall Senator Levine, for the reasons stated, be permitted to vote? As many senators as are in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Senator Levine will be permitted to vote. And I should say, under Senate rules, required to vote under the circumstances. The Senate having decided unanimously that he shall be required to vote. Senator Schneider.
Mr. President, a number of weeks ago, we had a debate on whether the legislature should set tuition as a matter of one of our sessionly duties here. That proposal was rightly and overwhelmingly rejected. That was the right vote at the time. And this debate really is a bookend to the one that we had about whether the legislature should set tuition as a matter of course once every 2 years. The tuition cap at 2.5% really is a measure of predictability that we're giving to our students, and I applaud the Appropriations Committee for its work in that regard. I also appreciate the focus on fees. And there may be some that think that capping tuition or having budget section oversight of fees is micromanagement. I categorically reject that. Focusing in on college affordability and ensuring affordable access to our institutions, that's one of the most important things we do when we fund higher ed. So it gives a measure of predictability to our students across the state, Mr. President, whether they attend Minot State or the University of North Dakota, about what their tab is going to be for college. And the bottom line for the people I represent, Mr. President, it's fewer trips to the blood bank. So this is a good measure to have in this bill. Appreciate the 2.5% tuition cap and the focus in on fees.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, the questions on the final passage of House Bill 1003, would the Secretary please open the key? Each senator record your vote. All senators have voted. Any senator wishing to change their vote, Secretary will close the key. The final tally on House Bill 1003 reveals 45 senators voting yea, 2 senators voting nay. The bill is passed. Returning to